And let me get this up on the board. It's not starting. It's not turned on. Only people are coming online. All right, I see Monica. Okay. Maybe the reason we're not seeing people online is because you guys are all here today. That could be. All right. Someone share me what their headline has to be. Just one line.
Long-awaited miracle.
Long-awaited miracle. Okay.
The world is about to change.
The world is about to change. Okay. Yes.
As the Mashiach finally arrives.
As the Mashiach finally arrived. Okay. Monica, you wanted to share something? What? You have to unmute yourself. So. Okay. From and anyone from the anyone want to say a quote that they would have in their article? Anyone have a quote? Yeah. Okay.
I put, as Paul Harvey would say, here is the rest of the story.
Rest of the story. Okay, very good, very good. Who else? What happened? We lost Monica here. Okay, so we have different views, and what I'm gonna just think about what you wrote, and then after today's class and after next lesson, after the next two lessons, you'll look back and you'll say, would you change the article a little bit if you understood it differently? Today we're going to deal with the greatest elephant on the subject of Mashiach. You know what that is? What's the greatest elephant on this whole subject? Greatest elephant is, who is it? Who is it? Who is Mashiach? This has been in debate for over 2,000 years, and it's been one that has brought on the unfortunate death of millions of Jews. This subject. Well, let's take a look at text number 1. We're going to look at this from the Jewish perspective and the Jewish text. Text number 1. Hinei anochi hineni shalech malachi lefanecha. This is from the prophet Malachi. It says, "Behold, I will send my angel, and he will clear a way before me, and suddenly the God whom you seek will come to his temple." So the prophet Malachi says, "I'm going to send an angel, and he will clear a way, and suddenly he will come to his temple." The translation from Rabbi Yosef Cairo in Magid Shearim, he's also known, Rabbi Yosef Cairo is the one who originally wrote the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, lived in the city of Tzfat in the 14th century. When a mortal monarch plans to return to his home, it is a typical protocol for his arrival to be announced in advance. An initial announcement may give notice that he will arrive in 10 days, followed perhaps by a second advisory 5 days in advance, and then 4 days until a final proclamation the king is approaching the capital. Prophet Isaiah informed us that the Jewish Redeemer will not unfold in this manner. As it is foretold, the first one to Zion, behold, here they are. And for Jerusalem, I will give a herald. In other words, Jerusalem's residents will not notice that all the tribes of Israel are converging on their city before the initial announcement is made by the first individual to reach Jerusalem, who will call out, look, here they all are about to enter the city. It will be so sudden that the city residents will not notice a thing before the reality materializes. The announcement of the event will come as one, hence the initial notice for Jerusalem, I will give a herald, will be, behold, here they are. So, what do you think of this? According to this, it's the first text we see. Suddenly God comes, seek your temple. Over here again, he writes, how's it going to be? It's going to be with a surprise. It's going to come in a way that will be completely unexpected and a surprise. Text number 3. This one has a little bit of a different take on how it's all going to unfold. When God will raise up the people of Israel and redeem them from the exile, he will open a small, thin ray of light for them. Thereafter, he will open another, far wider aperture. Finally, God will throw open the supernal gates that open to all the four corners of the universe. So this one is a little bit of a different take. This one says, no, it's going to be slowly. It's going to be one light open and then another one, then another one. We're still going to get revelation slowly coming at a time, but it's not going to be everything at once. Whereas the first two texts tell us it's going to be in the blink of an eye. The residents of Jerusalem won't know what's going on. They'll still be fighting over the East Jerusalem. The West Jerusalem is Israel. Is Jerusalem the capital? Is it not the capital? And suddenly, out of the blue, we're all going to be there and saying, "Hey, we're coming to visit the temple." They'll say, "What temple? What are you talking about? Right there. It's standing right there. You don't see it? Oh, I thought there was a mosque there a minute ago. Now there's a temple." Okay, well, this is the way Rabbi Yosef Cairo describes it. But others obviously say that that's not the case. This is from the Zohar. The Medrash Pirkei Echalot Rabasi says, the Jewish people of that generation will say, is it possible that the world functions as usual, and nevertheless the redemption will arrive this year? However, they do not realize that Mashiach's arrival will be sudden. So it will come in an unexpected way, according to this. And you'll keep saying, the world is not ready, but then suddenly it's going to happen. The Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud says, Rabbi Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Shimon bar Chalafta once walked through Arbel Valley and watched the break of dawn. Whereupon Rabbi Chia told Rabbi Shimon, so will be the Jewish redemption. It will begin with small steps, as it is stated, although I will sit in darkness, God will come, God will be a light to me. Then as it progresses, it will greatly swell and expand. So he is again saying, like text number 3, that no, it's going to be gradual. It's going to be a process, and it's going to play out. So which is it going to be? Is it going to be sudden, or is it going to be gradual? Is it going to be something that's going to happen immediately, or is it going to be something that's going to happen in a way of process? And this is question number 1. Let me get this on the board for those watching. Okay, is it going to be sudden or gradual? So we see multiple sources. We see text number 1, 2, 4 that indicate that it's going to be sudden, it's going to be supernatural, it's going to be out of the blue, it won't be expected. Then you have others that seem to indicate that no, it's going to be the other way. It's going to be gradual, it's going to be in an organic and a natural fashion that's going to take time. So the answer is both are right. We'll give you a good Jewish answer. Who's right? Both are right. And this is what we call in the Hebrew language Be'ita or Achishena. It's actually Aramaic. Be'ita Achishena. Says the prophet Isaiah, the smallest will become 1,000 and the least mighty nation I am God, I will hasten it in its time. Prophet Isaiah says, I will hasten it in its time. If you're hastening it, then it's not in its time. If in its time, then it's not hastening it. You can't have both. Be'ita achishana. Be'ita means in its time. Achishana means it's going to be quickly. So the Talmud asks, what do you mean? Ksiv be'ita, ksiv achishana. It's the same verse that the redemption will arrive. It says it will hasten it. And it also says it's going to be in its time. So what's it going to be? It can't be both. It's either early or it's in its time. So you could say, well, we always start exactly 5 minutes late, right? So that's the Jewish style. So it's in its time, but it's still late. So the Talmud resolves this contradiction, and it says like this: if they will merit, I will hasten it. If they do not merit, it will occur only when it's in its time. So the Talmud says that the prophet Isaiah is actually telling us that it could be in two different ways. It's giving an option. Either it could be in its time, or it could be early. If you merit it, then it's going to be early. If you don't merit, then it's going to be in its time. In other words, God's not going to go over time, but he could bring it earlier if you're deserving of it to be so. Now, when we say being meritorious, it's not... So if you're saying that we're going to merit it, then according to that, it will come in a way that will be suddenly, because it's going to be before its time, and it won't go through that whole gradual process. But if it's supposed to be in the time, then it will be that. Then it will take that gradual process. And it's important to understand that either option is possible, and it could happen both. And as a matter of fact, it's not necessarily that one negates the other. We could be part of a gradual process, and then it will happen suddenly as well. It could take time to put things in place and then happen quickly. So it's like if you're waiting, that the example that we gave before, the king arriving. So you could have the arrival of the king, and everyone's sitting and waiting, and he's supposed to arrive at 11 o'clock, but meanwhile it's taking time to prepare and getting everything set up, and then suddenly at 10 o'clock he shows up. It was still a gradual process to set up the arrival, but it still arrived early. So in essence, it's really both. It's a gradual process. I mean, we've been here for close to 2,000 years, over 2,000 years, close to 2,000 years, depending on how you count. But regardless, we've been here for a long time in exile, and still, it could happen with a blink of an eye. So you could say 2,000 years is a long time. It's a gradual process, but still it could happen in a blink. So it's not one or the other. Now that's how it's going to happen as far as that goes. But now you say, let's get to the meat. Give me the beef. So what's actually going to take place? So it begins with the announcement of Elijah the prophet. This one you all heard. Elijah the prophet, says the prophet Malachi, I will send Elijah the prophet to you before the arrival of the day of God. I'm going to send Elijah the prophet before the day of God. What's the day of God? So our sages understand this to mean before the day of the coming of Mashiach. Eliyahu Hanavi. He lived in northern Israel in the 8th century. Why specifically Eliyahu Hanavi? We all know he's the one that visits the Seder. He's the one that visits the bris, the circumcision. But why specifically him? So you could say, well, he's just a good candidate because he's been around. But there's more to it than that. And that is Elijah is the only one, or should I say one of the only ones in history that ascended in a physical body up to heaven. Elijah never died. That's why if you look for Elijah's resting place in Israel, you won't find it. You'll find some people who lived at that time. You'll find some of his students, but you won't find Elijah because as he ascended to heaven, and we actually know the place in northern Israel, in the Galilee area where it was that he ascended to heaven, and as was told by his student. And what is Elijah's function? And we'll soon say why that's important. Why is it important that it has to be an individual that's in a physical body? So number one, Elijah will, announce the arrival of Mashiach. That's going to be his first job. Step number two, he has to inspire Israel to better their ways, to prepare their hearts for the redemption. This is the second thing of Mashiach, of Elijah, of Eliyahu Hanavi. Number three, he'll restore prophecy to the Jewish people. And there are sources for all these, but we're not going to go through all the sources, not going to read through them all, but they obviously are not made up. Number four, he's going to answer unresolved halachic queries. And this we find numerous times in the Talmud. If anybody ever studied Talmud, you will, on more than rare occasions, you'll find that there's a question that's not answerable, that cannot be resolved in the Talmud. So the Talmud will just say the word teku. Teku is a four-letter word. Taf Yud Kuf Vav, teku. And it stands for Tishbi Yitaretz Kushyot V'Bayot. Tishbi, meaning Eliyahu HaTishbi, referred to Eliyahu HaTishbi, will answer the questions and answers. So he's going to come and answer questions. And this is important because when we're going to have the Holy Temple rebuilt, so we have to know how to act as a people. And we have to therefore have the answers to some questions that are unclear. And if there are certain questions, let's say, of how to conduct ourselves, and we've never resolved those answers, so he's going to come and resolve them. And this is another reason why it's important that it needs to be a man in a body, because number four, he's also going to restore the Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin went through 10 different places, and it ended up in the final city of Tiberia. And it says the Sanhedrin is going to be reinstated in the city of Tiberias. Some people actually tried to reinstate the Sanhedrin there, but have not been successful. The Sanhedrin, for those of you who don't know, is the high rabbinical court and has 72 judges. So he's going to institute it. He's going to reinstate it, not institute it, reinstate it. And therefore, it's important that you need to be someone that's been in a body, because we're told that Torah lo b'shamayim, Torah cannot be in heaven, and it has to come down in a physical sense. So in order for it to be restored, it has to be through someone who, so to speak, has lived through all that time, so to speak. So that's why it has to happen through Elijah. But this is the job of Elijah. Number one, to announce Mashiach's arrival. Number two, to inspire Israel to better their ways. Number three, to restore prophecy. Number four, to answer unresolved halachic queries. And number five, to restore the Sanhedrin. Now you can go back to the question, is this going to happen immediately or is it going to happen over time? Because based on what we just said, if Mashiach's going to come with a blink of an eye, then how could you say that Elijah's first going to come the day before? So there are a lot of questions with this regard, and these are questions that perhaps will have to be resolved when Mashiach comes, when Elijah comes. Will be one of those questions that may not have the answer. In figure 5.2, the only point to this is we want to show how this is an Agada from 1560. Okay, 1560. And what is it depicted? It depicts a picture of Elijah blowing the shofar and in Jerusalem. You see that? See on the right side, you see Elijah blowing the shofar and sending out the bad guy that's depicted in the picture. Okay, a Roman or whatever. But the point is that we see that this is something that was part of our faith already for a long time, believing that Mashiach, that he's going to announce his arrival, and he believes that he's going to blow the shofar on Har Zaytim or whatever it is. There's different views of exactly what's going to happen, but this is clear that Elijah is going to come and announce the arrival of Mashiach. Fine. This is step number one. Oh, here's that picture looking for those of you online. Here's that picture that we just mentioned. Okay, all good till now? Next. Who's Mashiach going to be? Like I said, this is the real elephant that has spilled a lot of Jewish blood over the centuries. And we're now going to give you a very, very clear description of who Mashiach is. And it is an undisputed description of who Mashiach is. And if he doesn't fit everything that's on this list, you know that it's not Mashiach. Let's begin with Reb Chaim Vital. Reb Chaim Vital was one of the known Kabbalistic masters. And he says, King Mashiach will certainly be a righteous human born of a man and a woman. Number one, a physical man born to a man and woman. Next, what is Mashiach's qualities? It doesn't say man, actually. It says a righteous human.
Yeah.
It says Adam. Okay. Anyway, that's a separate discussion. But anyway, let's just go to the next one. Text number 9. This is from the Medrash Yalkut Shimon. He says, behold, my servant will succeed. He will be exalted and elevated, and he will reach the tremendous heights. This is from Prophet Isaiah. This is a reference to King Mashiach will be exalted over Abraham, elevated higher than Moses, and will reach tremendous heights greater than angels. This is his resume. He's got to have a pretty good resume to do that. He'll be greater than the wisest of prophets. He'll be greater than Moses, according to this. As we'll soon see, Maimonides says he'll be close to the prophecy of Moses, but either way, he's definitely within the realm of the prophecy of Moses. And it's going to be a very, very great individual. Text number 10, Maimonides, the King Mashiach will arise from David's descendants, will be wiser than Solomon, and a great prophet close to the level of Moses. He'll therefore teach the entire nation and instruct them in the path of God, and all nations will come to hear his words. Okay, again, very similar, talking about his greatness. The Medrash says he's going to be greater than Moses. The Maimonides says he's going to be close to Moses, but regardless, the point is he's going to be greater than any other prophet. Another one, he's going to be humble. This is from Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson in Hayom Yom. Mashiach's uniqueness will be his humility, despite reaching the pinnacle of greatness, due to which he will teach Torah to the patriarchs and to Moses. He will nevertheless achieve the ultimate in humility and self-nullification, due to which he will also teach the simplest folks. Ultimate humility. He's going to be one that's going to teach all the greatest prophets at once, even Moses, even Abraham. He's going to teach them, educate them, but at the same time, going to be the ultimate humble one. So we see endless amounts of qualities that Mashiach is going to have. He has to be someone that's wise in Torah, that's great in wisdom, that's a prophet. So many characteristics about Mashiach, which is you have these incredible qualities. And he's going to take all these qualities and bring them into one place. How can it be that all these qualities fall into one place? So we're going to take for a moment, we're going to get a little bit Kabbalistic for a moment, because it's good to see things from its spiritual aspect, and this way we have a better understanding of how that actually plays out. You say, Mashiach is great. Okay, it's great. Now, how are you going to measure this greatness? Moses, Mashiach, Abraham. So when it's very superficial, you don't really have a way of measuring greatness. But what we're going to now learn from the Rebbe's teaching on this aspect is, if we understand the different levels of the soul, there are 5 different levels of the soul, the neshama, and Mashiach is going to achieve the 5th level. And as we're going to see, the 5th level of the soul is not an independent level, but rather it's the unifying level. It's the one that encompasses everything. So there are 5 levels of the soul: nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida. You have the nefesh, which is the vitality, the biological aspect of the soul; the physical aspect, the one that is associated with its physical needs, eating, drinking, etc. You have the ruach, the spirit, which is the emotional aspect of the soul, the one that's connected with the feelings and emotions of the individual. The neshama, which is another higher level, is the level of the intellect, one that's connected with reason, understanding, intellect. These 3 levels we reach every single day through our 3 prayers each day. Then you have the level of chaya, life. When we talk about life, this is more associated with faith, but one that's beyond our physical life, one that's the deeper aspect of our soul that's associated with our faith, that's about not rationally explained to us, something that is our soul's innate capacity to faith that's there. We reach this level every Shabbos and Yontif when we pray the Musaf prayer. And then you have the Yechida. The Yechida is called the unity or the singularity. It's the essence of the soul. What is the difference between the essence and the other ones? The essence means that it doesn't stand as its own level, rather it's all-encompassing, affecting everything. It brings the life into everything that's there. In other words, to that level, the Yechida, everything in essence is the same. This level will reach once a year, anyone know? On Yom Kippur, and the 5th prayer that we say on Yom Kippur, the Ne'ilah prayer. Now Mashiach, let's read text 12. Mashiach's fundamental quality is that he is the collective Yechida of the Jewish nation. For the mystics reveal that King David merited the collective dimension of Nefesh, Elijah merited the Ruach, Moses the Neshama, Adam the Chaya, and Mashiach will merit the Yechida. In other words, before I continue reading on, so let's explain. There's a level of soul, there are souls in each generation, and then there is a general soul that has the collective aspect of those souls. And in each generation, there's someone that is able to connect to all the souls. But the level of Yechida is one of Mashiach for all the souls. Let's continue reading. Of the 5 dimensions that each soul possesses, the lower 4, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, and Chaya, are individualized rungs with particular feature and functions. By contrast, the Yechida is the soul's singular, indivisible core. Just as it is true regarding each individual soul is the very essence of the Yechida, the same is true of the life force of all creation. That life force itself has the Yechida, that's very essence of the divine energy that caused it to exist. This Yechida is abstract, defying every qualification or form. From this Yechida, all the individualized branches of the divine energy necessary for creation emerge. Now that Mashiach is associated with collective Yechida, all creations, its essential core energy is unlimited. not only in quantity, but in quality as well. It's entirely perfect and complete. Therefore, when this energy manifests in this world through Mashiach, everything will function at the highest and most perfect level. Let's take us back for a moment to what we talked last week. We talked about the difference, the way individuals were in a free world as opposed to the way they were in a world where they are subjugated to others. Remember we talked about that? I guess not. The idea is that there's one aspect of having faith in a situation where you're being forced to have that faith, where you have the KGB breathing down your neck, or or Hitler forcing people to the gas chambers. But then you have faith that's associated with a time of freedom. That's a time of choice, a time of being, a time of expression, a time when we are being successful in a physical sense. That's a different kind of faith. That's an all-encompassing faith. It's a faith that's not separated from our identity. It's a faith that's incorporated within our life. This is the idea of Yechida. The level of Chaya means a faith that is another level beyond our physical life. The biological, the emotions, the intellect, and then faith is another fourth level. When you talk about the essence means it's encompassing everything. It's not a separate level. It is the essence of what everything really is. Like we have life in our body, that encompasses everything within our life. Whether it's a hand or a foot or a brain, even though they function differently, nevertheless, there is a higher source of life force to everything. That is the Yechida. Yechida is the oneness of everything together. This is the idea of Mashiach. Because Mashiach is going to be, as we talked in the last three classes, this is why it's important that we have the foundation of what the point of Mashiach is. The point of Mashiach is to be, as we talked in the past, to be the ultimate of everything, the ultimate of creation. Is that what we said? Or am I still off? The ultimate of creation, the ultimate of everything, of why the world was created, is culminating with Mashiach. It's not a new thing, it's not a different thing. It's the culmination of everything. So when we talk about the individual of Mashiach, he has to be someone that as well is an all-encompassing individual. It's not a question, am I smarter than King Solomon? It's not a question, am I greater in prophecy than Moses? It's not a question of who's better, me or you. The idea is that Mashiach is going to take all these prophecies, all these teachings, everything that we had over all these years, and unify it, make it one. So when we say it's great, he's greater than Moses, it's not a question of whether he's going to be holier than Moses or not. It's he's going to take all the teachings of Moses and now bring that all in one. Make that unifying aspect of everything that Moses taught us and say, look, now we've gone through 3,500 years. Let's bring that all together. Yeah.
There's a paradox to that. To be all-encompassing for the essence, you have to embrace all the people of the world. And earlier on, Judaism has accepted the idea that some people need to understand life through a different religion. And to be all-encompassing, that means the Mashiach may not necessarily be only Jewish, because there's going to be aspects that the strong Jewish mentality is going to have a clash, one with the other, saying
Okay, I hear your question. Is your question is that Mashiach is whether or not he's going to be Jewish or not? That's your question?
Practicing Judaism only.
Okay.
As opposed to practicing life encompassing all of the Jewish aspects, but demonstrating to a group of Jewish scholars that
Let me answer. First of all, what you're saying is a good question. Okay. To what aspect is all encompassing? This idea of all religions, the Jewish perspective is that we believe in the 7 Noahide laws. 7 Noahide laws are ones that are for all, universal, all humanity. And one of them is to believe in the one God and not to have any other idols. So if other religions go with that view, then that cannot fall in line with what we believe. We believe that there are universal laws for everyone. Now, as far as whether Mashiach is going to be a Jew or not, well, if he's going to have this Jewish soul of the Yechidah, then it would need to be as such. It has to be a descendant. It has to be a descendant of David, as we're going to talk about. So that's a separate question. Okay, what you're asking is 2 separate questions. One is the identity of Mashiach, and one is as far as the world goes. And the truth is that yes, Mashiach has to be able to inspire the entire world, and that's that's part of his job. By doing what? By teaching the 7 Noahide laws. The Rebbe in his later years in the 80s and beginning 90s always encouraged to teach the Noahide laws. So that yes, it should be something that affects the entire world. Mashiach has to affect the entire world. Will there be some people that will reject it and fall to the wayside? Yes, there will be as well. Yes.
Just was wondering if you could briefly define Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, and the other levels of
Yechidah
that is mentioned.
Well, we did define them briefly. They're explained over here. One is the biological life. You see, it says it in the chart. Biological life, emotions, intellect, and faith.
Oh, I apologize. Thank you.
Okay. So at a certain point in time, so now Kabbalah teaches actually even further. As we said before, every person has this aspect of the soul. And as I said earlier, we have once a year, the time on Yom Kippur, when we connect to this level of the soul, the Yechidah. So everyone has a certain embodiment of Mashiach. And we all have a certain spark of Mashiach. At a certain point in time, Mashiach himself will experience a personal transformation where he is going to bring about these prophecies and in a unifying way for all people. To date, the greatest prophet is Moses. He was the unifier of all the people at the time. Mashiach is going to take that a step further.
I'm trying to interrupt one second. One thing that's really bothering me, it seems like God who created all, it's like we're going from God back to God, but God in physical form. This is really kind of, if Mashiach's going to have a physical body, it sounds like we're talking about God.
Okay, so the answer is what we've talked about for all the previous classes, which is we explained that God's ultimate purpose, that he wants to have a physical world, and we went through 4 lessons explaining the ultimate of Mashiach is that it has to be embodied in a physical realm, because that is the ultimate creation. Like if we stayed in a spiritual realm, then that's not God's purpose. That would not constitute the ultimate, and we explained that at length in the previous lessons. So if Mashiach is going to be a spiritual individual, then that's going to negate everything that we just talked about in the last 3 lessons, explaining what the purpose of Mashiach is. Purpose of Mashiach is to play out in the physical world. And so therefore, the leader of this era has to be someone that's physical as well. That's why we said even the one to usher in the redemption cannot be a spiritual angel, but it has to be Elijah, someone that went up to heaven in a physical body. Part of that as well, as I pointed out before. But good question. Okay, text number 13. Moses, the first redeemer, reached the age of 80 years with no knowledge or intuition about the eventual role as a redeemer of Israel. So will it be, God willing, with the future redeemer. When the time comes, God will appear to him, and then in the spirit of Mashiach, that until that moment was hidden on high, will descend upon him, similar to the experience of Moses at the burning bush. So in other words, there's nothing to say that the individual may be sitting in this room right now. It's probably unlikely, but it's possible, because God is going to reveal to him at that time. Moses obviously was born with a special soul, but he didn't see himself in that way until God appeared to him and told him it's your time. God is going to have to appear to Moses and say it's your time. Now, if someone comes tomorrow and claims to be Mashiach, how do we know whether or not that's the real deal? So how do we know that he's not a false Mashiach, right? So for this, we're going to take a look at Maimonides, and we have a MRI a way to give a diagnosis for Mashiach or not. And this is taught to us very clearly by the Rambam, Maimonides, and I should point out that these laws is the last two laws of his entire book, known as the Mishnah Torah, 14 books of the Rambam. The Rambam is the only individual, the only one to ever write the specifics of every single one of the 613 commandments, meaning the halachas, the laws, the way all 613 commandments are. The Code of Jewish Law, the way we have it today, is basically about relevant mitzvahs. The Rambam went into detail about how to bring sacrifices. He went into detail laws about sabbatical years, which is coming up next year. He went into detail things that are not relevant in many cases, but still he went into detail explaining all 613 mitzvahs, all the halachas, all the laws that he was able to collect. He's the only one that ever did that. And it's for this reason that the Rambam says that if you really want, you can go straight from the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, go straight to his book. From Moses till Moses. There's none like Moses. It says, Moshe ad Moshe lo kam k'Moshe. Because Moses, his first name, Maimonides' first name was Moshe. Moshe ben Maimon. So if you want to know the entire Torah, you go from the book of Moses, you go to the Rambam, you have everything there. Why do I give this introduction? Because the Rambam is the only one who says the laws of Mashiach as laws, not as stories or background discussions, but the Rambam actually sets it as law. This is the halacha. Halacha means the Jewish law. As being such, we don't know of anyone that disputed the Rambam in whatever he talked about in these laws. And therefore, being that nobody disputed it, we have to assume that this is the accepted way in our Jewish tradition. Okay? I will note as well, just an interesting point. As many of you know, the Rebbe very much encouraged to study Rambam every day. I study 3 chapters of Rambam every day. If anybody does not study, I encourage you to do so. You could study, at least it's set up that you could study either 1 chapter or 3 chapters. I study 3, but I would encourage you to study 1 chapter. There is a schedule and which chapters to do which day. It's very easy. You go on Chabad.org/Rambam, and this way you'll know you're studying the entire Torah. You're getting all the details of all the 613 mitzvahs as taught by the Rambam Maimonides.
Daily mitzvah.
The daily mitzvah is a shortened version. If you can't do you can't do one chapter, at least you should do the daily mitzvah the way it's taught there. At least you'll know all the 613 mitzvahs. And what's interesting is that this year, just an interesting point, if you do 3 chapters, you finish it every year. So this year, it was started last year on the 17th of Tammuz, and this year it finishes on Gimel Tammuz, the 3rd of Tammuz, which is the Rebbe's yahrzeit. Just an interesting. It started on the 17th of Tammuz and the 3rd of Tammuz. Okay, that was my what's it called? Station ID. Pause for station ID, right? My commercial break. Okay. Text 14. So with all that being said, you have to understand that when we read these in the Rambam, Maimonides, this is accepted as the way it is in Jewish law, and no one has ever disputed this. When a king from the house of David will arise, who as his ancestor David diligently studies the Torah and observes its mitzvos as prescribed by written law and oral law. Number 1, he has to be someone that studies diligently Torah and observes all the mitzvahs. Number 2, influences all of Israel to walk in the way of the Torah. Not only does he have to study himself, but he has to study Torah, but he has to influence others. Rectifies the breaches in its observances and wages God's battles. Then this person is presumed, listen very carefully, is presumed to the Mashiach. Now, if he succeeds in the above, and he builds the temple in its place, and gathers the dispersed of Israel, he is certainly the Mashiach. So what the Rambam is doing here is splitting this into 2. He is taking the diagnosis and breaking it up. And you have these as well broken in figure 5.4. The presumed Mashiach. Number 1, he needs to be a descendant of the house of David. If he's not a descendant of the house of David, off the list.
Through Solomon.
I'm sorry?
Through Solomon.
Through Solomon? Oh, through Solomon. Okay. I assume there's a reason that you said that, but anyway. Yes, I know. Okay. Number 2, he has to be supremely pious and well-versed in Torah. Okay. Number 3, he has to influence the Jewish nation to follow the ways of Torah. And number 4, he has to wage the God's battles. That doesn't necessarily mean he has to take swords and guns and go wage battles. It means wage the battles of God, meaning it's also an ideological battle, a spiritual battle. Fight for the future of our faith, etc., etc. It doesn't necessarily need to be a physical battle. All those pave the way for a presumed Mashiach. This is going to be important because there have been many presumed Mashiachs. Confirmed Mashiach must, number 1, gather the Jewish people, bring us back to the land of Israel, and number 2, build the 3rd holy temple in its place. I'll have to get rid of the mosque. That would be... So we have the presumed Mashiach and we have the confirmed Mashiach. So if the presumed Mashiach can campaign all the way till the end, then these identifiable benchmarks, namely bring the entire people to gathering back to the land of Israel and building the 3rd temple, that is how you know it is done. Okay, don't jump on anything yet. Let's let this play out. Now, every generation has a potential Mashiach Redeemer. That means someone that is within the status of the presumed Mashiach status. And there is a specific candidate who is someone that could fulfill that position. This is why we explained, we had a text a week or 2 ago where we said Rabbi Levi went to Mashiach and he asked him, when are you coming? And he said, I'm coming today. You remember this text we read? And he said, he came back and said, what do you mean you're coming today? Are you playing around with me? And he said, today if you listen to my voice. So we said that Mashiach is is sitting amongst the those in Rome. He's changing his bandages, right? We describe what he's doing. You say, what do you mean? So Mashiach's been waiting now for whatever, 1,500 years since that time. So to 15. So the answer is that was the Mashiach of that generation, and he was waiting for his moment to be revealed, which didn't happen in that generation. So in other words, every generation has that soul of Mashiach ready to be revealed if the time is ripe at that moment. Text 15, we see a similar Talmud. Yerushalmi says, a man was plowing his field and the axe suddenly low. That's how I feel sometimes when I walk outside here. Here I walk outside. Okay. Yeah, that's what it is. I walk outside 2 o'clock in the morning. An Arab passerby inquired, what is your nationality? I am a Jew, the plowman replied. Untie your ox, the Arab advised, and unharness your plow. This is considered a sign of mourning. Why? Because the Jewish holy temple has just been destroyed. What is the source of your information, the Jew redeemed? I deciphered it from your ox's low, replied the Arab. As they were talking, the ox suddenly lowed once more. Harness your ox and retie the plow, the Arab said. The Jewish Redeemer has just been born. So this is very strange. What do you mean? There was the Redeemer. I know that he died because the sound that your ox made, and then, that suddenly he was reborn because he did it again. So regardless of whether this is more obviously a, not to be taken literally, more metaphoric type of thing, but it's indicating that Mashiach was born immediately after the destruction of the temple. In other words, what it's saying is that Mashiach was available, so to speak, to come in that day. The day the temple was destroyed, Mashiach's soul had already come to the world and could have been redeemed at that moment. And even though we're here for nearly 2,000 years, even though some people say his story was a literal story, regardless, it doesn't matter. The point is the same. The point is the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed the same minute Mashiach was born, because he still had that soul of Mashiach available in the world at that time. As Rabbi Avadia Bar Tanura says, text 16, in every generation, a descendant of Judah is born who is befitting candidate to be Mashiach. So now, based on everything we learned above, namely that Mashiach can indeed come at that moment, it's obvious that there has to be someone that is going to step and put things into motion. So there are those who believe that Mashiach is alive and well, and he possesses, he has physical and spiritual qualities. And it could be someone that is waging wars in a certain sense. But again, it has to be these things. He has to rebuild the temple. And he has to, he has to do these things. He has to be a Davidic lineage. He has to study Torah, etc. Now, with that being said, if there is someone that has the Davidic lineage, let's finish this thought, then we'll get to questions. If there's someone who has this Davidic lineage, then it makes sense that in every generation, students looked at their teacher as being Mashiach. Text 17. What is Mashiach's name? The scholars of Rabbi Shilah's academy would say his name is Shiloh. As it is stated, the scepter shall not depart from Judah until Shiloh comes, and the nations will rally around him. The scholars of Rabbi Yanai's academy would say his name is Yinan. As it is stated, may his name endure forever. As long as the sun, may his name continue Yinan. Scholars of Rabbi Chanina's academy would say his name is Chanina. As stated, for during their exile, I will show you no favor, Chanina. Some scholars insist his name is Menachem, the son of Chizkiah. As it is stated, because at the time of destruction, the comforter Menachem that should relieve my soul is far from me. Rabbi Nachman said, if Mashiach is among the living, he is a person who already occupies government positions such as me. As it is stated, their prince shall be of themselves, and their governor shall proceed from the midst. Rav stated, if Mashiach is among those currently alive, he is Rabbi Yehuda the prince. If he is Mashiach is amongst the dead, he is Daniel the beloved. Yes, Bob, you had a question?
Yeah, so, there was no concept or belief, was there a concept or belief in Mashiach prior to, or during the Roman occupation, before the Second Temple was destroyed? People were not hoping for Mashiach to come and eliminate the Romans?
Well, we're going to talk about the Barakova Revolution in a little bit, which happened shortly after the destruction of the temple, which was during the Roman time.
But before the destruction, there was no concept of waiting for Mashiach?
It's an interesting question. The question is, was the concept of Mashiach while the temple, while Second Temple was still alive and well? Obviously, they had the temple built. They had the temple, which was beautiful. It was actually more beautiful than the original temple at that time. It was rebuilt by Herod. It was a monstrosity of a building. So I would assume, and I'm not sure the answer, but I would assume the answer is that they're probably hoping for a better version of what they have at that time. In other words, they obviously weren't saying, we need to rebuild the third temple if you had the temple here, right? But they're probably hoping for it to be a more peaceful way, for a time when they don't have the Romans breathing down their backs.
Was the Shekinah existing in the Second Temple?
Yes, it was,
During
but
the occupation of the Romans as well?
yes, 100%. But there were a few things that were missing in the Second Temple that were not in the First Temple. The Ark was not in the Second Temple. So obviously they wanted to have the Ark back. They wanted to go back to those good old days, which means they didn't have the tablets there. They didn't have the Torah in the Ark, which was there. They didn't have the God's name, which was written in the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, known as the Urim V'Tumim. So they weren't able to ask God in his holy name, in the ineffable name, is that how you pronounce it? Of what they should do. They didn't use that name. There were a lot of things that had stopped already by that time. Even things that were in the first part of the Second Temple slowly but surely started winding down after something stopped after the passing of Shimon HaTzadik. There was a lot of chaos within the temple itself. I mean, like I said, this is a history issue. It's not a Mashiach issue, but there was destruction within the temple itself. There was a lot of corruption. People were taking the position of the Kohen Gadol who were not even priests themselves or who were paying their way to be there. So it wasn't a good time at the end. It just wasn't a good time for the Jewish people. Okay, let's go on.
I have a
What do we see
question.
from here? We see from here.
Question? Hi.
Yeah, you're asking a question?
Yeah, I just have one. So if in every generation there has been an individual with a soul of Mashiach, what has to happen? What do people have to do to bring this about?
What do we have to do to bring it about? Well, we talked about that in the last 4 lessons. We talked about the build up to this, to coming to this time in period. What do you have to do? You have to do everything you can to bring Mashiach. It's unclear to know exactly which deed is going to change the world. The Rambam says you have to see the world as if it's balanced, and every deed could outweigh that balance. But you have to do everything you can. And in 1991, the Rebbe said a very, very famous talk, which was a shocker to the Chabad community. And you could say, changed things from that time on. And he said, I have done everything that I can to bring Mashiach. Now I'm putting it in your hands, and it's up to each and every one of you to bring Mashiach. And then he made it, but it wasn't unclear. What do you mean it's up to each? So what do you want us to do? Well, he said you have to study about Mashiach. You have to learn about Mashiach, which you're doing now. You have to know what to expect. You have to, in general, add more Torah and mitzvahs. So it's hard to say exactly what is going to bring that about, but it's part of a process. Everything is part of a process. If I tell you that you need to build a house, getting back to that analogy that we said, you need to build a house. So each person is bringing a brick. Each person is bringing cement. Each person is bringing furniture. Each person is bringing bringing appliances. What exactly builds the house? Everything together. It's not one thing specific. It's all part of building that home. That's what we're doing. We're building God's home.
Thank you.
Sure. So the question, what we see from here is a few things. Number one, we see that in every generation that they proclaimed their teacher to be Mashiach, which means that there was a spark of Mashiach in every generation. We also see that it doesn't necessarily need to be someone that is currently alive. Could be someone that is going to be brought back from the dead, right? Because Rabbi Yehuda said, if he is among the dead, he is Daniel the beloved. Next, text 18. How do we identify a Mashiach in each generation? In each generation, people would assume in a particular individual, people assume that a particular individual was Mashiach if the redemption were to occur at the time. In this generation, it was declared and accepted that Rabbi Yehuda the Prince was the suitable candidate to serve as Mashiach. Similarly, the students of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the Arizal, wrote that he is Mashiach of that generation, as this is a straightforward matter. So Rabbi Chaim Fiskiyahu, the Stei Chemed, he wrote it's in this generation, it's Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, he said. Well, actually, one time he told his students, he lived in the city of Tzfat, one time he told his students late on Friday afternoon, he said, do you want to come to Jerusalem with me? And they said, yes, but 1 minute we have to go ask our wives. And he said, you just lost a chance. If you would have come right now to Jerusalem with me, Mashiach would have been here. So he knew that was that moment. God had revealed to him in that moment, but he knew it had to come like that. And he said, you missed the opportunity. It wasn't meant to be. Obviously, his students weren't ready. But it's important to emphasize that Geula, redemption, does not begin until that Mashiach is here. And we have to check off all these halachic boxes. And we have to do all these things. All these boxes have to be checked. It's similar to, if you're making a wedding. So everything's being prepared. Preparing the wedding hall, preparing the tables, the chairs, the flowers, the pictures, everything is in place. You can have a beautiful wedding hall, but if the bride and groom don't show up, the wedding is not a wedding. So you need to have Mashiach come at that moment. He has to check off all those boxes. He's got to make sure it's the right bride and groom. It's not someone else showing up in their place. And then you know that you're ready to go.
Can I add two things?
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to accomplish is that originally there was 600 some souls, and that's it, and everybody has a spark of those souls, and those souls keep coming and expanding, and we don't know which one of us has that particular spark that will turn into the flame of revelation, and they become the Messiah.
Right.
But we all have that opportunity.
Right. In a certain sense, we all have that. That's true.
Number two, where is I can't understand yet, where is your understanding that when the temple was rebuilt, it doesn't encompass the mosque, but it eliminates the mosque?
It's very simple. You can't build a temple if there's a mosque there. It's in the way.
But what if the Mashiach that's going to rebuild the temple or be
Okay, I don't know. I don't know.
Why can't it encompass?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. When Mashiach comes, he'll build the Beis Hamikdash, and we'll see if the mosque ends up there when it's built. That's all I could say. I don't know. We don't know 100%. Next week, we're going to talk more about what's exactly going to happen and the order, the process of things, and the way it's going to play out. So now we're talking about more about who Mashiach is. Okay, we should probably also address another question that probably people have, and that is the concept of many of the Chabad Hasidim who say that the Rebbe is Mashiach. So I think that after everything that we discussed, he definitely checks off the first part of the boxes. The first part of the boxes is a descendant of King David, someone that diligently studied Torah, and someone that educated the masses as well to study Torah. If the other things were to happen, then he is definitely Mashiach. Could we say he's definitely Mashiach? You can't say anyone is definitely Mashiach until they do those last two things. Could we be pretty confident to say that in our generation he is the chosen one? We could pretty confidently say that he is the one in our generation who checked off the first few boxes. So that's as far as that goes, which was probably something that some of you were wondering. Now we're going to talk about one more aspect, and this is obviously another issue which will come up in this matter, and that is with regards to false messiahs. And how do you identify as false messiahs? So with everything that we learned, we now know there is a difference between a failed messiah and a false messiah. And this is very important to know. A failed messiah is one who had the qualities, but it fell through for some reason. A false messiah is one who never had those qualities to begin with and never deserved to even have the title Messiah, as we'll talk about. We're going to give the most famous known example of a failed messiah, and that is what's known as the Barakova Revolution. And what's interesting is, if you take a look at text 19, Rabbi Akiva was a phenomenal sage among the great sages of the Mashiach era. He personally served as King Bar Koziba. Barakova is the same person. Barakova just means the star, the arms bearer, and would proclaim that Bar Koziba was the King Messiah. Along with all sages in the generation, he considered Bar Koziba to be the King Messiah until Bar Koziba was killed because of sins. Now, it doesn't say it's necessarily his sins. It's unclear, but the point is that we see that even Rabbi Akiva identified as a Messiah who was a failed Messiah, not a false Messiah. Let's take a look at the story. We're going to watch a short video of the story of the Barakova Revolution.
From its inception, the Jewish nation lived with a messianic vision. Even in the worst of times, the Jews anticipated the rise of their star, a savior from the tribe of Judah who would liberate them from foreign subservience and enable religious freedom. 2,000 years ago, Rome stretched forth its mighty branches. In 6 of the Common Era, Judea, the heart of the Jewish homeland, became a Roman province. A few decades later, in the wake of the Great Jewish Revolt, the Romans destroyed the Holy Temple of Jerusalem. That marked the onset of the Jewish nation's exile and persecution. At the same time, the Jews could now anticipate their liberation through the promised Jewish Messiah. In 117 CE, Hadrian became Roman emperor. He toured the empire, erecting pagan temples, promoting Roman beliefs. When he reached ruined Jerusalem in the year 130, he ordered the city plowed over and rebuilt as a Roman city named Aelia Capitolina, with a temple to Jupiter, the chief Roman deity, erected on the site of the Holy Temple, the Temple Mount. This was more than the Jews could take, and in 132 CE, a major revolt began unlike any other. The rebels assaulted the Roman garrison stationed in Judea and succeeded in capturing and holding part of the territory. As Jews from the diaspora flocked to join the cause, Hadrian responded by sending massive reinforcements from Syria, Egypt, and Arabia, but these were similarly defeated. Rome was badly shaken. Hadrian realized the need to muster a truly enormous army in response. He summoned legions from across the globe, including his best general, Julius Severus, who was ordered to travel from Britain with 3 European legions, and units were dispatched from as far as the Danube. Nearly 1/3 of the colossal Roman army was redirected to counter the Jewish revolt. The Jewish army was led by Barakova, about whom we know precious little.
The name Barakova wasn't given the man's name. We actually know his name was Shimon Bar Kokhba. But it was called Barakova because of the biblical verse in the book of Numbers, Derach Kochav Yaakov become Shevet Israel, that a star will come forth from Jacob and a staff will rise from Israel. And this verse was understood to refer to the Messiah. As far as we know, many Jews believe that Barakova was indeed the Messiah and that they were supporting the coming of the Messiah in participating in the revolt.
Such views were reinforced by Barakova's military gains and his liberation of Jerusalem.
What's really amazing is that during the period of Barakova's rule, he put out coins. On the back side of some of these coins was actually the words Elazar Kohen, Elazar, the high priest, apparently. And this, they indicate that they tried to restart sacrificing.
Despite Barakova's widespread support, the Jewish sages were sharply divided on whether Barakova was the Messiah.
There were different views among the very important rabbis that we know from the Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva was convinced that Barakova was the Messiah. The Jerusalem Talmud actually records it as saying, this is the King Messiah. At the same time, others, like Omer Victorta, were convinced that he couldn't possibly be the Messiah. And he told Rabbi Akiva, the grass will be growing on your nose, meaning you'll be the grave before this guy will ever be a Messiah.
Eventually, the tide turned. The legions launched a campaign of systematic annihilation that left Judea almost entirely depopulated. The Roman historian Dio Cassius writes, very few of them in fact survived. 50 of their most important outposts and 985 of their villages were razed to the ground. 580,000 men were slain in the various raids and battles, and the number of those that perished by famine, disease, and fire were past finding out. Barakova withdrew to the fortress town of Beitar. It was besieged and fell in 135 CE, ending the revolt. Its occupants were slaughtered in an enormous massacre on the night of Av, the date in the Hebrew calendar on which the first and second temple had been destroyed. Barakova died there, and Hadrian bitterly oppressed the Jews and the Jewish practice in retaliation.
2 years ago, I was at a scholarly conference about the Barakova revolt. Israeli archaeologists mentioned they had actually already located over 500 of these villages. I imagine by now, you probably found a lot more. So here we see that these events really occurred and that this war and this tragedy was as great as we find in our sources.
In the ensuing 2 millennia of Jewish exile, the Jews, unlike the Romans, survived and thrived, returned and rebuilt, and continued to eagerly await the fulfillment of God's promise of redemption.
So you could ask, was Rabbi Akiva mistaken? Did he make a mistake? I'm not getting to that yet. Did he pick the wrong guy? Was someone that he supported, was that really a fake? And the answer is he wasn't mistaken at all. He threw his support behind Barakova, who was legitimate. He was a presumed Mashiach. For whatever happened, there's different opinions in what exactly happened. It just says he died because of sins. It doesn't say if it was because of his sins or whatever happened. There's different opinions. But regardless, the point is that he felt that the Jewish law says we need to support this person and even refer to him as Mashiach. And knowingly, the Rabbi Akiva was saying that if the time comes and he actually rebuilds the temple, we'll know for sure he's Mashiach, but it doesn't mean that what he did was a mistake. He was a failed Mashiach. The Rambam writes, if he succeeds in the above, he builds the temple and he gathers the people. If he did not succeed, or to this degree, or was killed, he's surely not the Redeemer as promised by the Torah. Rather, he's like the other worthy kings of the Davidic dynasty who died. By contrast, this guy was a false Messiah. And this is what you have to understand. The Shabtai Tzvi was born in 1626 in the city that's known as Izmir in Turkey. He was a charismatic man, handsome man. He even knew much of the Talmud and Kabbalah, which was a problem that he knew the Kabbalah because he did things that were not appropriate, and he declared himself Mashiach. And he lived in Constantinople, Alexandria, Athens, Jerusalem. He went from town to town proclaiming he's Mashiach, and he had some PR experts that he worked with that helped him give off the message. And it was a great tragedy what happened. You had people who sold their homes, who were living lavish lifestyles, who sold their homes to move to Israel. They gave up everything. But he was a false Messiah. He never fit the bill from the get-go. He may have had some fervor support, but he never passed this litmus test that you needed for Mashiach. He didn't live up to what the Rambam tells us need to be done. He didn't observe the mitzvahs as prescribed in the written law and the oral law. On the contrary, he did things that were very clearly opposed to Torah and mitzvahs. He did things that were completely abusive to an extent of traditional Judaism. And in 1666, he converted to Islam. So, and even after his conversion, even after his death, sadly, there were many who believed that he was the Messiah. Now, I can't really blame the Jews at that time because, what were they living through? They're living through pogroms. They're living through massacres. They're hoping maybe something to cling on to, that this is the future. This is the way out. And but they had this charlatan who led them through these lies. And they say he had symptoms of manic depressive and he had psychological issues. The point is that is a false Messiah. That's a false Messiah. That doesn't negate the others that Mashiach didn't come ultimately in their time, that they are a failed Messiah. Now, let's get back to the ultimate point. So you have a failed Messiah versus a false Messiah. Now for the last point. What is Mashiach's ultimate role? We've established what Mashiach will do and how he's going to go about it. Once his initial campaigns prove to be successful, once the wars have been fought, once the temple is rebuilt, once we return to the land of Israel, what happens now? And as we explained in the last few lessons, all the way into lesson 4, we explained that this is God's dream, so to say, making a home for God in this physical world. It's not about a sudden magical moment that's going to change and everything is going to just go back to nothing. It's a moment that's going to be the culmination of everything that we had. So Mashiach's role with that is that he has to bring about the monarch of King David, and he has to bring the people back to serve the will of God. He has to teach them what's the right point, what's the proper point. he has to transition and mature from just an organizer, a revolution. He has to be an inspiring teacher. He has to be someone that's going to teach us what is the way to live in this new realm, what we call Mashiach. Text number 20. The need for Mashiach to serve as a monarch is defined by Maimonides to elevate the true faith, fill the world with justice, destroy the power of the wicked, and wage the campaigns of God. Accordingly, once Mashiach has successfully influenced all humanity to serve God in unison, and the entire world will be exclusively engaged in divine pursuits, Mashiach's role as a monarch will no longer be necessary in the same degree. At that stage, his primary role will be to teach the people and direct them on the divine path, influencing them as a nasi, as a leader and a teacher. So it's not so much as a monarch, but to be a teacher and to know how to live in this world, the post-Mashiach world, as it will. And let's first do the key points, then we'll take questions.
Lesson 5. Out of the blues. 1. Isaiah describes two options for the redemption: in its time and hastily. If we are meritorious, the redemption will arrive earlier and in a sudden, abrupt manner. If not, the redemption will come in its default time, and it will unfold as a gradual process. 2. Malachi prophesies that Elijah the prophet will return before the arrival of the day of God, before the coming of Mashiach. Chief among his duties will be to announce the imminence of Mashiach's arrival. 3. Mashiach will be a mortal who will possess incredible qualities and will achieve tremendous spiritual heights. On top of that, he will be exceedingly humble. The Kabbalists reveal that Mashiach's soul will embody the essence of the collective soul, the Yechid of all creation. 4. Maimonides outlines two stages in identifying Mashiach: A. Presumed Mashiach, and B. Confirmed Mashiach. A descendant of King David whose pious and versed in Torah influences the Jewish nation to follow the Torah's ways and wages God's battles is presumed to be Mashiach. If he gathers the Jews to the land of Israel and builds the third temple, he is the confirmed Mashiach. 5. Each generation has a potential Mashiach. Throughout history, students of various influential Jewish spiritual leaders have pointed to their leader as a potential Mashiach. However, the redemption has not begun until Mashiach successfully completes the tasks of the confirmed Mashiach. 6. There have been various historical attempts at actual messianic campaigns. Two particularly famous attempts are Barakova and Shabbatai Tzvi, with the distinction that Barakova was a failed potential Mashiach, whereas Shabbatai Tzvi was a false Mashiach. 7. At a certain point, Mashiach's role will transition or mature from king to primarily that of an inspiring teacher and religious mentor.
Okay. Yeah.